We've looked at the changes in the profession of journalism and its impact on education coverage in particular. We know the last few years has been very traumatic for the news industry. There have been a lot of layoffs and consolidations and bankruptcies. So we wanted to know, how did this affect the coverage of schools and education? So we have done a content analysis of news coverage. We've done interviews with people in the education news business to see how they are coping and what changes they would like to make. And we've done a national public opinion survey to get the perspective of citizens and parents about changes in education. I am guardedly optimistic about the future of education news. Clearly, education is very important to parents and people in general. They understand education is crucial for long-term economic development and civic engagement. We find that people are making that transition from the old to the new media, but they are getting information. They would like to get more substantive information, and young people are going to be relying on electronic sources of information. So the news industry is going to have to take that into account as they plan their future. The question we really were interested in is how the news industry is transforming itself for the digital world. We know that the print version of newspapers is losing subscription levels and circulation rates, but we're finding that newspapers as well as other old media sites are recreating themselves for the digital world. So for example, they are adding community forums, blogs, some of them sponsor programs, they have RSS feeds, so they are basically trying to combine the best of the old and new media given the new fiscal realities that the industry faces. One of the key recommendations we found is people say they want more substance in the news reporting. There's a myth that people do not want to read policy reports, that they're not interested in policy information. They're more interested in scandals or personality or the politics of a particular policy area. When we asked people what they wanted to see more coverage of, they said they wanted more information on teacher performance and student achievement. They're also interested in the nuts and bolts of how schools operate, school curricula, the budgets, the finances of those education systems. So we basically recommend that reporters can pay a lot more attention to the substance. They don't just have to focus on the politics and personalities, which tends to be the case right now. We did a public opinion survey to find out the view of consumers about education news in terms of where they get their news and where they would like to get their news in the future. And basically we found that people still rely predominantly on newspapers as a major source of information, as well as family members and friends. Some of the new media outlets are starting to rise in importance, but not in the education area to the extent that we've seen in other areas. So there still is a combination of reliance on old versus new media. The other thing that we found that was quite dramatic were the age differences. There's very much a generation gap in news consumption about education in the expected direction, young people being much more sympathetic and much more likely to rely on electronic and internet sources of information. So those clearly are going to be a huge growth area in the future as those people start to age. The continuing vitality of newspapers, I think, is a noteworthy result in this project. A lot of people have forecast the death of the newspaper, and certainly the newspaper in its former vintage is a dying breed. But we have found that newspapers are continuing to play a major role, in part because they are adapting to the digital world. They are starting to cover things in greater detail. The nice thing about a website is you can do a story, but you can have links to reports, databases, or other sources of substantive information. So we're seeing that newspapers are recreating themselves, and people are finding a lot of that information very useful.